Can everyone hear me? Excellent. My aim tonight is to go through. I'll be making a recommendation on the top. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, Pete, it's not. There. Okay. Right. Thanks. What I want to do tonight is run through the top 1, 2, or 3 kits in each of the major scales of each of the major marks of Spitfire. Sorry? Yes, exactly. I'm going to start with a quick refresher on key Spitfire variants. As I said, I'm going to scan through the best available kits in those 3 scales, ranked entirely subjectively by me. So please jump in. I'm happy to take questions and also to be argued with, because particularly in 1/72nd scale, I pulled all of this from the internet. I don't have a lot of personal experience on it. And unfortunately, I've had to, for sake of time, I've had to omit any reference to photo recce Spitfires or Seafires. It just blew it out far too far. So what I'll do is I'll just start by doing a quick run through on Spitfire development. It was obviously designed by Reginald Mitchell in 34-35 in response to Air Ministry specifications for a new monoplane fighter for the Royal Air Force. It was a direct evolution of Mitchell's Snyder Trophy winning seaplanes from the late 1920s and early 1930s. Mitchell designed the airframe around the new Merlin engine, then under development by Rolls-Royce. The prototype airframe, K5054, first flew on March 1935. And was it 36, was it? Yeah. Well, as I said, please correct me. And Pete will have more on this later, and presumably starting with the correct year. The last Spitfire was manufactured just under 13 years later, in February 1948, with a total production standing at just over 20,000 airframes. The first production version, the Mark 1A, where are we? Entered RAF squadron service in August 1938. Development was then spurred by the demands of war as follows. The Mark II, with incremental improvements over the Mark I, entered service during the Battle of Britain in 1940. Combined Mark I and Mark II production was just under 2,500 airframes. The Mark V was the most produced variant, with just under 6,500 examples. The main versions were the Canonarm Mark 5B and 5C. They entered service in 1941, but were outclassed later that year in the European theatre by the newly introduced FW190A. Although obviously we kept flying them in the Pacific. Although I think rudders were usually fitted to the airframes. I see that there isn't a rudder missing on one of those. The Mark VI and Mark VII, just under 100 of which were built of the Mark VI, and 140 odd of the Mark VII were high altitude versions with optimised engines, pressurised cabins, and mostly pointed wingtips. The Mark IX was the second most produced variant, with just over 5,600 examples built, and it was created in direct response to the FW190 threat by mating a Merlin 61 engine with a Mark V airframe, and it entered service in late 1942. The Mark VIII was intended to be an evolutionary improvement to the Mark V, but was gazumped by the Mark IX because of FW190s. It didn't enter service till 1943, and just over 1,600 were produced. The Mark 16 was basically a Mark 9 driven by a US-built Packard Merlin and with US tool and service specifications. Many Mark 16s were made with a cut-down rear fuselage, and just over 1,000 of these were made entering service in November 1944. The Mark 12 was the first production standard Griffin-powered Spitfire. It entered operational service in February 43 with over 100 machines produced. The Mark 14 was the most produced Griffin variant, with just under 1,000 produced in high and low back C&E wing and standard and clipped wing versions, and they were in service from January 44. The Mark 18, referring to the previous slide, was basically a refined version of the 14E. The Mark 21, which is this photo, had a redesigned wing, strengthened undercarriage and a modified fin with a fuselage externally similar to high-back Mark 14s. 300 were produced and they entered service in April 45, really almost missing the war. And finally, the Mark 22 and Mark 24, which were essentially Mark 21s with a cut-down rear fuselage and bubble canopies. Pardon me, most were also fitted with a large Spitfire style fin and rudder. Just over 300 of both of these marks combined were produced and they entered service in 1945. So what I'll do now is just quickly run through each of the versions in 172, 148, 132nd scale and what's available. And again, this is very subjective on my part. And I've limited myself to the top one, in some cases 2 or 3 examples of each version. For the prototype in 172nd, Checkmaster Resin made a pretty accurate, well-reviewed kit in 2002. Advantages were its accuracy, but disadvantage was that it's just a pure resin kit. So it's not for the beginner or faint of heart. In 148 scale, ACTSMS in 2013 did another full resin kit, and it had multiple options. It had the prototype was fitted with a number of different engines and cowlings, and it gives you the option for all of those. It's fairly positively reviewed as well. ACTSMS quality control in recent years has slipped. It's not what it used to be, so I can't vouch for what the quality is like now, but if you can get an early version, it's probably pretty good. There was a Paragon did a 1990s era conversion for the old 148 Tamiya Mark 1, which seemed pretty good, but the Tamiya kit's got its own issues, so they'd probably go with this one. And in 132nd scale, if you've got truckloads of money, Aerotech did a 132nd scale one, which is accurate, full detailed, well detailed, but it's full multimedia resin photo etch, and it's very expensive. Hannants has got one for, I think, 306 Australian dollars on its website today when I looked. In terms of Mark 1s and Mark 2s, there's been literally swarms and squadrons of these released over the years. So this is where it gets subjective on my part. KP, by my reckoning, has the most highly regarded Mark 1, Mark 2s in 172nd scale at the moment. These kits sort of date from about 2016. Airfix, sort of new Airfix, I think released in 2010, a reasonably highly regarded Mark 1 as well. It had some simplifications and deep panel lines, but as usual with Airfix was fairly accurate in outline. CMR again did a accurate resin kit in 2002, and Tamiya in 2000 did a typically smart Tamiya offering, but apparently it's got quite a lot of errors and mistakes, and is not to be recommended in terms of its actual shape. The standouts in 148 scale are the new Edward Mark 1 and Mark 2 series and the new Tamiya Mark 1. They both date from the last 4 or 5 years. Airfix also released a Mark 1 in 2015, which is highly regarded. But I might just quickly run through something that Brett Green wrote about all 3 of those kits. If you're thinking about a Spitfire Mark 1 in 148 scale, he said of the 148 scale Spitfire Mark 1s, the 3 most recent, Edward, Tamiya and Airfix, are well in front of the rest of the pack. Being all plastic kits, the Airfix and Tamiya Spitfires have enough in common to easily compare. Both kits offer useful options to depict earlier or later versions of the Mark 1. However, Tamiya's overall level of detail in the cockpit in particular is superior to Airfix. Surface detail is crisper too, although both kits share a similar philosophy of relatively simple recessed panel lines rather than a mass of rivets. Also, Tamiya's building experience is sublime, while there are a couple of fit challenges on the Airfix kit. Edward has taken a different approach that includes cockpit detail enhanced with photo etch parts and fine lines of intricate rivets. In the end, I think that Tamiya and Edward are easily the top of the heap. So that's Brett's view on that. And I should also mention here the 1990s Tamiya kit which was great for its day and is still supremely buildable, but it's got a number of noted accuracy issues, and I think it's best. It's now been eclipsed. In 1/32nd scale, in terms of Mark 1s and Mark 2s, Revell released its Mark 2A in 2014. It's well melded, but numerous accuracies. I read one review today that said there are so many things that are wrong with this kit, inexcusably wrong, that a detailed list of them would extend for pages and pages. The kit has, in fact, sparked its own mini aftermarket industry. There's a very large number of aftermarket products that you can buy for this. Anyway, it's largely redundant because last year, Qatar, which has been set up by, funded by a entrepreneur, I think based in Auckland, with expertise from some of the former Wingnut Wings employees, released its mid and early boxings. It's an amazing kit. I managed to snap mine together, all the major fuselage wing components fitted perfectly without any glue. It's amazing. In terms of Mark 5s, these are, hang on, I'm just getting myself confused here slightly. 172 Mark 5s. We've got airfixes from 2011, which I think is presumably based on its 2010 Mark 1, which so the same points apply. And Tamiya from 2000, similar to the 2000 Mark 1, has got quite a number of inaccuracies. My understanding is that the best Mark 5 again is 5B is from KP, very, very highly regarded. And 5C, Airfix released a completely new tool, 172nd Mark 5C in 2020, and apparently it's fabulous. They're the two older Airfix 148 Mark 1 and Mark 5 kits, which are fairly readily available, but and build very well, but have got a few accuracy issues about them. In terms of 148 Mark 5 kits, the Airfix 2014 kit was very good, and it's been further improved with some minor modifications to the current boxing, which is what's on the screen there at the moment. Edwards 5B and 5C kits were released simultaneously in 2021, and they're both excellent. There's not much to choose between Airfix and Edward for the 5B, but if you want a state-of-the-art 5C, for now it's Edward, because we all remember this. This is the Airfix 5C, which was done by sort of new mould 5C wings, and also a Seafire wing if you wanted to make a Seafire, married to the fuselage of its 1970s era 5B. And they're very readily available. I've had 3 or 4 of them over the years, never got around to building one. Quite a decent kit, but it has been completely eclipsed by this beautiful thing. If you haven't had a look at any of those new Edward 148 scale Spitfires, they are just sublime. In terms of 1/32nd scale, Mark 5, Hasegawa's from the 1970s still stacks up as the best available. It's got raised panel lines, a few inaccuracies, but it's pretty damn good. Hobby Boss released a couple of kits in 2011, which build very well, but have got a number of, I wouldn't say they're fatal flaws, but they're pretty darn close to it in terms of fuselage shape and stuff like that. But fortunately, all of that will be in the past. Qatar are releasing their 5A this year, and I'd be absolutely gobsmacked if they did not follow this up with a 5B and a 5C. It'll be money for jam for them. And seeing as they need to make money because they're not bankrolled by Peter Jackson, this will probably help. Mark 6s. This is what I found to be the quite divisive Italeri kit from 2011. The consensus online appears to be meh, and it appears to be based on their mid-2000s Mark 9 family. Hasegawa does a pretty good job of a Mark 6 based on its 1990s Mark 5B kit. I understand you need to do a bit of work to it to get it to actual Mark B standard. And I've also seen one kit bashed from this and a new Edward kit. And again, in 132nd, Hasegawa currently owns the show. 1970s era, but very good. Mark 7 KP's just dropped this year a Mark 7, which I imagine will be as excellent as all their other 172nd kits. Checkmaster also did one in the early 2000s, and AZ Models has got a very highly regarded Mark 7 as well. I hope that's that one. In 148th, ICM, from way back in their old days in 2001, is the only dedicated Mark 7 in that scale. I would be surprised if Edward doesn't come out with one in the near future. In 132nd for Mark 7, it's DIY, but this is one that Roy Sutherland built from Barracuda Studios, built in 2010 for a book on building the Spitfire. He did that from Tamiya's Mark 9 kit, and it's beautiful and a reasonably easy conversion. Mark 8s, AZ Models from 2012, very highly regarded, and in a number of boxings, Mark 8s, Mark 9s, Mark 16s. But again, all now, I knew I missed something. I did not include pictures of Edwards, but they've got a series of really nice Mark 8s in 172nd. And moving on to 148, of course, Edward now completely owns the show in terms of Mark 8s, Mark 9s and Mark 16s. I've looked closely at all of these kits. They're absolutely brilliant. They've got a few foibles, but they're just delightful. And in 132nd, what can you say? I built the Mark 9 a couple of years ago. It's probably the most sublime modelling experience I've ever had. It was unbelievable. Everything just clicks together. They're not perfect kits. I mean, they're 15 years old now, those tools, and there are some things, you know, there are ejector pin marks in places that, you know, companies wouldn't put them in today and stuff like that. But otherwise, the fit is unbelievable. Now we're getting into the sort of more esoteric territory with Griffin Spitfires. Mark 12, CMR did a really nice resin kit in 2005, and Extra Kit, if anyone remembers them, from Hannon's, did a really positively reviewed kit from 2007. And there was a bunch of really lesser quality ones from the 1990s from companies like Merlin and others. Oh, were they? I might be Sword, were they? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's supposed to be fabulous. And then in 148, it's not quite as good news. Airfix in 2011 and Special Hobby in 2013 both released their take on the Mark 12. They're both well-tooled modern kits, but both have got reported accuracy issues. Airfix's rear fuselage is supposed to be a bit fat. And apparently the Special Hobby kit's got the wings and the fuselage in the wrong position. I'm not quite sure how they manage that, but or what that involves, whether it's actually serious or whether it's rivet counting. I haven't seen the kit. And in 132nd, you're in conversion territory, but fortunately there's a new player on the ground for this, and that's Laminar Flow Design, which is run by a guy called Matthias out of Belgium, and he 3D prints conversions tool to the Tamiya 132nd kits, and they're brilliant. You can follow any number of blogs online where people are converting the kits, and they seem to go together brilliantly. I haven't got the Mark 12 conversion, but I'm intending to at some stage in the near future. Mark 14s and Mark 18s, there's, look, any number of numerous old releases of various quality. The most infamous is probably the Academy one. AZ model in 2010-11, put out a couple of well-regarded ones, but I think they've been eclipsed by Sword's 2016 C&E Mark 14s. Airfix from 2019 released, did a very welcome modern replacement for the highly inaccurate 1990s Academy kit. I don't know if anyone's built the Academy kit. I did about 15 years ago and was horrified. It sort of, if a Spitfire could be pregnant, it is. It's sort of quite bloated around the fuselage, and you just can't fix it unless you get a replacement fuselage. So this is definitely the go in this scale. In 1/32nd scale, the now defunct Pacific Coast did a mixed multimedia short run kit about 15 years ago. Very nice kit. I've partially built one of those because I'm converting it to a Mark 21, so I've only built the fuselage, but it goes together really well. But these days, again, Laminar Flow to the rescue. I've got the low back conversion, and it's an astonishing piece of 3D printed work. The parts are all actually printed inside their cages for protection during shipping, and the quality is astonishing. For the Mark 21, special hobby, the consensus online is that it's a good kit, although it's based on the Mark 22 and there's been some criticism of that, so I haven't seen the kit, I can't vouch for it. In terms of 1/48 scale, the only kit I could find was a Planet Models 1990s era, I think, resin kit. So you're now getting into quite esoteric territory, but not as esoteric as 1/32nd. That's my current attempt to convert using the Spitfire, using the Matchbox Mark 22 wings to the Pacific Coast fuselage. Now, obviously, dihedral's all wrong and it's all just taped together, but I'm hoping to finish that in the not too distant future. In terms of the final couple of Spitfire marks, Airfix released, when did Airfix bring out that one? Probably about 10 years ago, maybe? Yeah, it's pretty highly regarded. Special Hobby did a couple from 2012 onwards. They're well molded. Apparently they've got a number of accuracy issues. I haven't seen them, but coming into 1/48 scale, the absolutely famous Airfix, justifiably Airfix 1/48 Mark 22 and Mark 24 from 1996, generally accurate in outline. It's got a few detail omissions and errors, but it's still an absolutely superb kit and the only show in town if you want to do something in 1/48 scale. And I said I wasn't going to mention Seafires, but you can't mention the Airfix Mark 22 without mentioning the Airfix Mark 47 Seafire. That's been done in a number of boxing, and it's an equally fabulous kit. And finally, in 1976, Matchbox released their the only 1/32nd Mark 22-24 that's been done to date. Accurate outline, but as you'd imagine, there's a number of detail shortcomings and inaccuracies. I mean, the Hasegawa 1/32nd Mark 5 series stems from the same year, and there's no comparison. The Hasegawa kits are just much more finesse than that one, but it's still pretty good. And look, and that's the end. Happy to take questions.